Welcome back to Ivy Unleashed. Thank you so much for being here, and you're welcome because today is going to be amazing. Bria Gadd is here. Welcome to Ivy Unleashed.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I love your show. I love spending time with both you guys, and I just feel super honored and excited for this time.
Yeah, you might not know her by Bria Gadd. You might know her as the Period Whisperer.
Yes.
And we have so many questions for Bria, and the timing of you being in my life specifically and Brooke's for different reasons. Mm-hmm. It's so great that we've met you and that what you're creating for content for people around the topic of perimenopause it's like this mystery word that until you're starting to enter it, you're like, what's happening to my body? Like, what is this? And you have all the answers. And so we're so happy to talk about hormones and nutrition and moods and sex drive and
all of the things hormones. So whether you're in perimenopause or not, like think about for me, my hormones affect me every day. Mm-hmm. So I'm super excited. I am curious why perimenopause and why hormones. Let's start with that, Bria. Why this work?
Yeah. So for me, I had built a career like when my kids when they were babies, they're now almost 16 and almost 13, which is kind of mind blowing. But I had started out as like a fitness trainer and a fitness and nutrition coach. And I built a business that way and I loved it. And I always worked with women. And it was a very fueling thing for me. And it felt like I didn't have all the things figured out, but I'm like, okay, I got my fitness and nutrition figured out, which is a big one, right? For all of us. But then around the age of 35, so I've been doing it at that point for almost 10 years. I noticed a shift in my clients. And because a lot of my clients, and maybe you find this as well, were kind of in my age box, right? Like we're drawn to each other that way. And I started hearing things like they just weren't getting the same results. They just didn't have the same energy to do things. They weren't, feeling the best. And and so they pulled back and dropped off. And it was really definitely gave me pause and kind of started my, deeper research into understanding things. But then it was around 37 for me and I'm almost 43 now, where everything, like I started to have the same symptoms. It was like it started with kind of just this low grade energy, this brain fog, this fatigue, and it escalated into some anxiety, which I never struggled with in my life. Some irregular periods, which is always like a sign, okay, where they weren't irregular as much as they were heavy. And so there was a change there, which I think is always a sign we should, have a checkup. I had like what I like to call undeserved weight gain, where I'd changed nothing, but all of a sudden I'd put on about 15 pounds, like primarily in my stomach. And if you go way back in my Instagram, or my socials, you can see it. It's fascinating, like where it sort of starts to happen. And then the real kicker for me was that I stopped sleeping really well. I started waking up in the night, almost every night with night sweats and having insomnia, which was a rough one. And what you do in the middle of the night when your mind's racing, you Google things. And I mean, do not Google night sweats. And because it's like nothing good comes out of it, but it does mean you should go get checked out. So I went to my healthcare practitioner. She was amazing, took the time, asked the questions, did the blood work, and kind of looked at me and was like, Bria, you're the picture of health. And I was like, okay, let's be grateful for the fact we don't have any of these things that I'm Googling. But there is nothing more, I don't know, it was really devastating for me to think if I'm 37 and I'm doing all these things and I'm the picture of health, like, I don't know if it, because we know it gets more challenging as we age. So I'm like, if this is like, how am I going to do this for the next 40 years? It's not going to get better. And that was a real dark moment for me to be like, okay, I've got to better understand this. And I think the two things, I learned is that one, I didn't know about my body. I didn't really understand like hormones and the impact. And two, my doctor didn't know. And that was, a big reality check. And if I didn't know, as someone in the wellness industry working with women, how on earth would any woman who does amazing things out in this world that's not in the wellness industry, how's she going to know? So that was a real turning point for me to, one, educate myself, heal myself, and then try to make this information available and really simple for other women to digest so that they didn't have to go through what I went through or that they could heal faster.
Wow. I mean, we feel that. That's why we created what we created too, is to simplify things because it can be so overwhelming. And something just to plug the Period Whisper podcast is really broken down into specific things that, you know, if you need to focus on sleep or stress or nutrition, that's going to really help with this, or your mindset. And I think a big thing that speaks to me as I listen to your podcast, Bria, is like you authentically love women and care about their well-being. I think in one of your bios, it was like, Bria teaches women to stop ignoring the whispers of their body and powerfully step into who they were always meant to be. Like, if you don't feel okay, you can't, you don't have the capacity to think about how you want to show up in the world. You're in survival mode. And so I just want to thank you for the work you do. And I'm so happy because you're such a warm but brilliant spirit that is really helping the world a lot. And we want to get into kind of, you know, if you hear the word perimenopause and you're like, I have an idea that's probably before menopause, but like, what does that actually mean? And how do we know if we're in it?
Yeah, I love this question. It's so great. And, you know, I want everyone listening to understand, like, the stats are 50% of women don't know the difference between perimenopause and menopause. And I was one of them. So it's nothing, you know, it's not like you should have learned it somewhere. No one's taught it to us. So I like to start with saying, like, menopause, which I feel like we've all heard about and gets thrown around a lot, is really just one day, 365 days after your last period. Everything leading up to that is what we call perimenopause, or you might hear it as premenopause or the menopause transition. And it's not a diagnosable condition. It's a reverse puberty transition. And it pretty much starts for all women around the age of 35, give or take, just the way puberty kind of starts for all kids around the ages of, like, you know, 11 to 13, like, or 12 to 14. You know, it really does happen. So I always say, if you're over 35 and you haven't achieved menopause, you're in it. You might not notice, like, you might not notice it, you might not experience it. And that has a lot to do with what is happening in perimenopause. And really, there's three major things that I think women want to understand. One, of course, the amount of our hormones are decreasing, which we all, I think, understand that to be, because we're going from being, you know, in our fertile reproductive years to reaching a point where it's no longer a priority in our body. And so we are no longer fertile and reproductively capable. So that one thing is happening that we all know, but that actually happens much more closer to like the late 40s for most women. So again, I always say most. What I think is the most important thing that we understand about this transition is, one, the job of our hormones is being passed from our ovaries to our adrenals. And our adrenals are our stress managers, and the hella busy, you know, like, they're doing a lot already. And in our culture, they're doing more than they've ever done before. And so a lot of our symptoms are going to stem from the state of our adrenals at the time. And this is why we're seeing more and more women have symptoms of hormonal chaos, we'll call it, much earlier than we used to, is because of culture and society. And the final thing that I always think is really, really important is understanding the changes in our brain and the shifting of our main sex hormones, so estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, impact really the memory encoders and retrievers of our brain, our hippocampus and our amygdala. And so the science is that we become more aware of things that have bothered us, things that past traumas. This is where that kind of rage or frustration can start to come in. I like to look at it like the philosophy behind it is that we have spent our whole lives since puberty being a little hormonally hijacked, you know, where every month, you know, estrogen comes on like these beautiful rose-colored glasses to essentially make us amenable to procreate, like to have sex, to get pregnant, to provide, like, to put our children above ourselves. And now that is going away. And although it feels irritating that we're bothered by this, I actually think it's a really empowering thing, because it gives us a lot more headspace to take care of our own needs and go after all the things that we really want in our life. But it can be scary otherwise if you don't look at it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I keep thinking too about the energy, right? When our adrenals are so overloaded, like, of course our energy is going to be impacted. And that wasn't something I learned about until I struggled with my energy and I went into alternative medicine. And, you know, I can think just a lot of women listening are like, okay, I've probably heard of that term, but will you dive a little more into that? And then how do we help that? How do we get more energy?
Yeah, I think it's so important, because at the end of the day, that's what it all comes to. And I like to think of it like we're all born with this beautiful full cup of vital reserve of energy, you know, unless we have some other issues. And through life, that energy is drawn down, like constantly drawing down by just existing and doing our things and our workouts and things like that. And we're trying to fill it up through, fitness and nutrition and
Sleep.
stress management and joy. What did you
I
say?
said sleep.
And sleep. Yeah, sleep, of course. I can't believe that wasn't the first one that came out of my mouth. And then, of course, we get bigger drawdowns, right? We get bigger drawdowns on that energy through, traumatic experiences, even just major life transitions like moving and the added workload on that. And perimenopause, so this transitional shift, it's not really any different from being in that first trimester of pregnancy where you're dog tired. There's a sort of a constant drip because your body is doing more during this time. And this is why we start to see more symptoms show up around the energy piece that Brooke you were talking about, is because our body's doing more and we aren't providing more energy supply unless we're aware of these things, right? So we have to really look at our body in like an energy supply and demand ratio in order to accomplish the goals and live a fulfilling life in all the years in our life. And I think what's so important is that when that drawdown gets too low, the body really kicks over into this unsafe place or, where we're having chronic stress, right? And stress will always do that chronically. And these days we're stressed. It's such an energy suck, right? We're stressed in so many ways. We're stressed from regular things that we expect to be stressed about, like work, relationships, family, all these things. We're stressed by eating foods that aren't as nutritionally valuable as they used to be. We're stressed by sitting in front of screens all the time. We're stressed by the toxins in the chemicals in our environment. So we have more of a load now than ever before. And so when that starts to happen, when we live in this pocket where that energy is so low, then we start to lose function in parts of our body. And so not only are we having a hard time accomplishing what we want in our life, but now we're starting to lose function, maybe in our digestion, maybe in our absorption, maybe in our gut health, maybe, all over the place. And it really all kind of stems from this ability to have a balanced energy supply and demand. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Totally. So when clients are coming to you and saying help with this supply, what are some of the main things you recommend?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I always think first we need what I like to call like a healing phase where we really want to take a look at the life and say, okay, where is our energy demand coming from and where is our energy supply, and create at least balance for a while until we like feel well throughout the day and we're sleeping better. So that really looks like our kind of the four key pillars of health. I think you guys talk about this stuff too. And what I always find so amazing is that you go to anyone who's in the health space who cares, and the process is very similar, right? Like we cannot avoid these four things. So one, really regular sleep schedules. So going to bed by 10, I mean, from 10 till midnight are our deepest sleep hours. So trying to get into bed if you can early and holding space, because sleep's hard. We try to control it and it can be stressful, but holding space in your sleep for 8 hours. So going to bed at 10, rising at 6, and figuring out kind of your sleep and rest window as best as you can, and really providing space for that and eliminating things that are going to impact our sleep, like being on screens right before we go to bed. The second thing I always say is in our nutrition is getting really regular with when we eat. So a lot of women want to try things like fasting, which, has some perks there, but when you are in a stressed, dysfunctional body, what we need is pillars that the body knows when is it getting its energy. So it's like, let's make sure we're eating very regular time to regulate that blood sugar. So it's waking up and eating within 2 hours, eating again 4 to 5 hours later, eating again 4 to 5 hours later. If you need a snack, we can throw that in there. But real consistency with our nutrition, so the body's not guessing, right? And left wondering when it's going to get this energy to heal. With movement, that is looking at what I call functional movement. So a lot of us I'm a big fan of fitness. I'm a personal trainer as well. But a lot of people are going out there trying to work out. And the problem that arises is if we have a loss of function, then we cannot repair from our fitness. And the other piece is that, cardio by nature is a real energy draw. Muscle building is like, I look at more like buying a house. It's a bit of a more sound investment, right? It draws down, it requires energy, but it creates energy when we're creating that muscle. So it's a better investment in terms of your movement. But if we don't have the function or the tools in our body to be able to do that, then we're just costing the body more stress and shoving it further into that unsafe place where we're going to see way more symptoms start to crop up. So I always like with movement, we pull the fitness and we really focus on functional movement for a healing period. So walking, yoga, stretching, giving rest. We really want to nail those pieces. And it's like, it's a bit harsh, but when we put fitness into life, you're asking kind of athletic levels of your body. So you got to treat yourself like an athlete. And if you don't have the sleep and the nutrition sorted, then we're going to, hit this phase in our life where that's the added drawdown, and we're going to start to break down more than we're building up. And the final piece of that around our energy is really revisiting joy and pleasure in our life. And this is something you guys do so well. I mean, I get joy just looking at your Instagram account. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
But, a lot of times we are starved for pure joy in life, joy that, and I know we get joy from our kids, Andrea, for sure, but I'm like talking about like pure joy and pleasure just for us. And I think, with sort of this hustle mentality or this, go mentality we've really lost sight of a very powerful energy source for us, which is pleasure and joy. And that's carving out time every single day to look for that. And look, it could be orgasming, but it also could be like listening to a song you love, or, spending a little time alone if that makes you happy, or hanging out with a friend, or, it could be any one of a number of things, but finding space for joy. And if you can't, it's probably because you're too stressed, because nobody's joyful when they're stressed, right? Like you can't take a joke, you can't orgasm. So it's like, we know we got to release that stress before we get there. And those are really the foundational pieces, is like, let's hold space for sleep, regulate our nutrition, make sure we're getting the right fuel mixture, pull back on our movement until we're functionally sound, and then look for pleasure, because that's how we supply energy to the body.
Thank you for walking through all that. I mean, that's a lot of tips and a lot of homework, and everybody has a category that speaks to you more that you're like, I definitely could focus on that.
Well, I think it's easier for the brain to categorize it. Okay, how am I taking care of myself? These are 4 categories. We always talk about these are the 4 categories that you can control to an extent. Yeah. There are things that you can create habits around, like the foundational pillars of health. I love the pleasure and the joy. Like for us, it's stress is kind of how we look at it when we explain the 4 pillars, but that's so beautiful. But when you're in survival mode, it is very hard to have that joy, to have that pleasure like you're speaking of. And I think, to your point, in today's society, so many of us are in survival mode. It's training our brain to get out of survival mode. That is really the first step. It's listening to podcasts like ours and yours, following social media accounts that allow you to think, okay, how do I need to pour back into me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as you're walking through these things too, I keep thinking about this requires a mindset too, because I've heard some of your content too, where it's like, the first step is do literally nothing until you're sleeping okay. Like if you're not sleeping okay, nothing's going to be regulated. Nothing's going to be efficient. This workout is literally pointless because it's just going to stress you out. And so I think it's really important, like Brooke's saying, to follow someone that weaves in grace and weaves in an exception to this rule you hear all the time. Listen, of course it's good to work out. That is great. I'm a personal trainer. Cool. But if your body is in fight or flight and you're so stressed and you're not sleeping, we've got to start there. And so you touched on it before with anxiety. And this is something that I've experienced more right around this. Like I am like, just like everything you're saying. Age 35, I'm like, what is this? God, my heart is racing. Like I'm going to weed out things that I think might be, I'm going to get better sleep. I'm going to take out alcohol. I'm going to, and I'm weeding these things out. But I think it's tough to get in this healing space when you are so ramped up with anxiety. And so what advice do you give your clients, or have you talked about when it comes to kind of taking on a new mindset of like, this isn't working, but I'm also not in a great headspace. Like, how do we get this kind of started and get in that mindset of healing?
Yeah, I understand. I think and mindset, as we all know, is so critical. And I think I always say like perimenopause happens for us and not to us because of this energy drawdown. It's really highlighting the things that aren't serving you in your life. And it's doing that so that we fix the things before loss of function gets so bad that, and as we're kind of aging, that all things fall apart. So I think be having like a real moment with yourself of being like, okay, if I don't act now, if I don't figure something out now, it is not going to get easier. And I know that seems really scary. And we have a lot of power within ourselves to know our own body and to start to heal these things. So I think, anxiety is a tricky one, right? Because it is very overwhelming. Like we experience like whatever stressor through our limbic system, and it's gonna, impact the entire body. And the trouble with our hormones is that when our cortisol is elevated, that stress hormone, our opposing hormone to cortisol is DHEA. It's the anabolic answer, and it can't come into the scene when cortisol is elevated. So if it's not in the scene, then we're not producing our hormones the way we should, and we're starting to lose function in there. So this is where we start to see at this stage in our life, where if our estrogen progesterone is imbalanced, then we are going to notice some more anxiety inside of our body. So I think your question is around the mindset. I think we do have to have a real moment with ourselves and be like, okay, in perimenopause, like I'm in this midlife, this is my opportunity to make these changes. And we do need to look, I think, at our year, and we don't need to focus on our health, on making growth in our health all year long, but we do need to take kind of like a 3-month block, I think, every single year to be like, how am I going to how am I going to progress my health forward, one time a year for 3 to 4 months? And then we've got 3 to 4 months to focus on our relationships, and we've got 3 to 4 months to focus on our career. But if we put it all in that time, then we can really see strides of healing and growth. And it doesn't have to be all year long. So I think just really looking at the fact that at the end of the day, we kind of have three priorities: health, relationships, and career. And if we break our year up, it becomes much more digestible. It doesn't have to be an always and forever thing. But if you don't have your health, what do you even have?
Yeah, and you mentioned losing function. Will you talk more about what you mean by that? Because I think a lot of people, it can sound like a lot of work. And so I'll deal with it later. I'll deal with it later. And to your point, like, don't, because it's not worth it. You are nothing without your health. So when you talk about losing function, what do you really mean by that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So I always think like if are doing these things consistently that we talked about, right? Like the four pillars that you talk about, the four pillars that I talk about, and you aren't getting results, or you cannot seem to be consistent, for me, that's a huge red flag that there's a loss of function. And what that means is, I think of it in two ways. One, kind of like a vacuum, right? If you imagine we've got these major systems in our body, like hormone production, immune system function, digestion, detoxification, energy production, and nervous system. And if there's a loss of function, it's kind of like when you're using your vacuum and it's not sucking anything up right now. It turns on, but nothing's going through. So we've got to figure out where the block is in that thing. And if you really look at your body, all these functions specifically, which have everything to do with our metabolism, right? And the optimization of our body: hormones, immune system, digestion, detoxification, energy production, and nervous system. They're all connected like an orchestra. And if you can imagine, if one of the instruments that goes off in an orchestra, so say the trumpet, which might be your hormones or whatever, if it starts slowing down or speeding up or playing a different tune, it's going to throw off the violin. And the violin's then going to change its tune, and it's going to throw off, the piano or the winds, and so on and so forth. And this is what we call like a loss of function. And the trouble is that a month later of all of these things playing off tune, it's an entirely different song. And we cannot really go back and just fix the trumpet. So we can't just come in and fix the hormones and now think that everything else is going to come back on tune. It just doesn't work like that. Now we actually have to come back in and look at all the areas of the function of the body and bring them all back into a place of homeostasis for balance or function. Does that explain that?
Yes. And I think it even hits home more like why this takes time. You know, I've had to watch Brooke be really patient trying to figure out what is going on and what supplement to take or not, or what protocol to do or not. And it all takes so much time, but it makes sense, right? If you're kind of reverse engineering this whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. I mean, and I always think that's one of the biggest pieces that if I could always, if I could share with women is like recognizing that it would be wonderful if we all were on top of the function of our body. Like maybe we do functional testing once a year and we kind of don't wait until there's symptoms to, get into that subclinical level and really see what's going on in our body. But that's just not how we operate in our life. We kind of wait until there's these symptoms. And if you're having these symptoms, right, like you're having really heavy, uncomfortable periods, or you have unexplained weight gain or stuck weight, or anxiety, or, and you're going to your healthcare practitioner and they're like, nothing's really wrong. Like we can't point to anything. That's when we know it's a loss of function. And we really need to kind of get in there and prioritize that piece. So you're there at that point, and it means it's going to take a healing period. And because healing takes time, the body needs its space and energy in order to heal those pieces. And I always say, like you got to give yourself at least 3 months. 3 months to heal and repair and start to gain traction again. The same way we would with like a broken ankle.
Yeah.
And would you say doing so by focusing on those 4 categories, like that is your ticket for the 3 months? Or if it is loss of function?
Yeah. Yes, that's a great question. So in my practice, what I like to do is I like to do functional testing so that we can we're always going to be starting with those 4 pieces, right? Those 4 pieces. But I like to, if we really want to uncover the hidden stressors and understand what's going on, like we need to get in there and do some type of diagnostic testing. So whether that's the saliva hormone panel, or whether that's gut health, or, a gut dysbiosis or gut pathogen, because, be specializing in gut, that like it doesn't matter how well you're eating. If you have dysbiosis or you have a pathogen or you're not breaking down your proteins, you can eat as well as you want, but we're not going to absorb the things we need. And that's going to create a stress on the body and a loss of function somewhere along the way. So I really like to look at diagnostic testing as kind of that added piece of isolating where these hidden stressors are, where the loss of function is, so that we can support it supplementally and with the lifestyle.
Yeah, it's like test, don't guess. And having a practitioner, someone you can work with that has access to those testing, it's huge. It's such a game changer. And I think about food sensitivities as well. And that's something you talk about during perimenopause. We see a lot more food sensitivities. Will you touch on that?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's never one straight answer, is there, Brooke? There's like, 3 sides to it. But in perimenopause, our gut microbiome does change, like because of the shifting of the hormones. So that does start to happen. So we can start to experience more food sensitivities because of that. I think it's more likely that because there's this transition and this drawdown of energy, that likely we've been eating a lot of things that maybe our body wasn't the best with anyway, but because we had this added vital reserve, it handled it on its own. And now we don't have the same vital reserve. So these things are going to irritate us further, which then starts to create more dysbiosis, or maybe even gut permeability, leaky gut, a space in the epithelial cells in the gut. And now even things that are really healthy for us are creating digestive upset. So that's where I think food sensitivities can really come into play. And of course, if we're eating things that are bothering us, then means we're likely not absorbing those things very well either. And it's another stress on the body, making our perimenopause symptoms worse.
I keep thinking just the age of this, and just like you're saying, it's kind of like you're getting out, and some people are still making babies at, mid 30s, but it's this new stage. And I feel like if you almost think of it like a reinvention, like who am I now? And yes, I used to eat a sleeve of Oreos, but how's that going for my body every time I do? Like even me lately, I'm like, I don't know if my body likes red meat, which is like super sad. Like I love a good steak, but like, I'm just noticing things are different. And it could be something that's like so annoying and like you have to stop all these things. But I almost feel like it's like taking inventory of who I am now, what works with my body now, what feels good now, what do I want now?
It's being so in tuned and in the present moment.
Yes. And I love when you said it's an opportunity, because that's part of the mindset that we need, because this does take time. Sometimes you're having terrible symptoms that you've never had before, and you're like, it's upsetting, you know, and it's not something we want to deal with when we're raising a family and running a business and all of these things. And so I just think it's even more important to have people that you're following that, one, can break down this information for you the way that you do, that is like very easy to absorb, but then two, to like help you with the mindset through this, that you don't have to figure everything out in a day. You can take your sweet time one by one.
And you need to take your sweet time so that it doesn't stress you out, because then it's pointless.
Yes, it's got to be manageable long term, right? Otherwise, you're right, we won't do it. And no, I love that you say that. In Chinese herbal medicine, they call perimenopause and menopause our second spring. And I think it's just this great reminder of how many cultures in this world revere women as they shift into perimenopause and through menopause, because we have all of this wisdom. We actually become more confident. We actually have these shifts in our brain that allow us to be more in tune with things, almost like when we were pregnant. And that's not the story we're spun here, of course, in North America. But ultimately, we've just been so pulled away from the messages of our body. I mean, if you're not in perimenopause yet, you have these messages very accurately from your body every single month in your period that tell you a lot about your health, or if there's some functional issues, or if there's a breakdown that we need to pay attention to way before we get to the point of symptoms. So, but nobody's taught us these things. And I think that's where that mindset piece you're talking about really comes in, is a real empowerment. Advocate for your health as a woman, know your body, hear what it's saying, and trust it.
Yeah, I love that. Hear what it's saying and trust it. Are you slowing down enough to be able to hear? And are you willing to hear, or just putting a Band-Aid on it? I'll deal with it later. I'll deal with it later. And I think our society has normalized this idea of you're just a woman. It's just age. It's just menopause. Like, this is just, sorry, honey, this is just how it is. Yeah. And I feel like when I started my healing journey, it was like, no, I'm way too young for this. And now I've started to adopt this mentality of, okay, if I get things better now, hopefully perimenopause will be a little better and menopause will be a little better. Would you say that's typically the case?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we see this, right, in other cultures of the world. Like, there are many cultures. I think Japan is a really good example where like the symptoms of perimenopause that we see here in North America, like, are almost non-existent.
Wow.
Because it has everything to do with our lifestyle. It has so much to do with the lifestyle leading up until now. And, you know, what you said there was so important, I think, Brooke, about this slowing down. Like, I will admit, I am like, a recovering hustle addict. I like tied all of my worth into the things that I accomplished every single day. And in that process, I didn't hear anything that my body was saying until it was so messed up that I had no choice but to stop. And we don't want to get there. We want to get to the point where we can really know our own body and absolutely go through these transitions where they're more like, gentle rolling rate waves of a transition and not a bloody tsunami. So yes, I think you're going to be just fine.
Well, and to everyone listening, there's hope. You don't have to stay stuck feeling this low vibration and energy and gut health symptoms, anxiety. Like, there are answers, there are solutions. And so I just hope everyone listening feels empowered of, okay, I don't have to stay stuck.
Yeah. And to get started, Bria has created a quiz, which I took, and I am in hormonal chaos.
Oh, no.
Which is funny. I mean, it's not funny. I knew it. Like, I'm getting my hormones tested. I'm in the midst of figuring out what's going on. But it's such a great place to start when you're like, how do I know? And where am I at? And then from there, the tools that you provide, the newsletter you provide, the content you provide. And so I would love for you to tell everybody where to find your quiz, where to follow you to get more from you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the best place, come and hang out with me on Instagram, at Bria_period_whisperer, or check out the Period Whisperer podcast. But all my quiz, all my freebies, things like that are all going to be on my website, briatheperiodwhisperer.com.
Oh, so good. I'm so grateful we met you, that you are in our lives. This is just selfishly, I'm like, this is so good. Not only just the content, but all the content, your socials and the podcast. I'm so excited for everyone to get to check you out. And we leave our listeners with 3 top takeaways. So you've provided so many golden nuggets, but if there were like 3 main things that you would recommend people to start with, or 3 just takeaways you want to leave them with, what would they be?
Yeah, I think one is understanding what perimenopause is and isn't, that it's a transition, it's not a diagnosis, that, we can reverse. You have so much control and so much opportunity here, and it happens for you. 2, I think start with those foundational pieces. We cannot avoid, and pick, as you say, pick one, start there. And 3, don't stop. I think we often look for results yesterday or tomorrow, but really the body has to heal before we're ever going to see the outer results of what's going on inside. So give it time, be patient.
Beautiful. Thank you. And Unleashing Ivy, 3 surprise questions. Mine has nothing to do with anything we've talked about so far. I'm just curious. I think you have such a beautiful relationship with your wife. And I just love hearing, personally, what you think really makes that thrive.
Oh, that's a great question. Oh my gosh. Right question is right. When I met Freedom, I just think this is the first time I felt really seen by someone, and like there's just nothing off the table. We're just really completely brutally sometimes, but honest and ourselves with each other. And so I think that's a huge part of, at this stage in my life, feeling wholly accepted by someone, is that I can be very honest at all times and she can be very honest, and then we always really try to have fun together. So I think those are the big things for us.
That's a good combo.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. And I love how much that lit you up. Like that's just proof. And it exists for everyone. Like I hope everyone finds that. It's so magical. Okay, my question. So I'm not in perimenopause yet. So my focus is more around my period and hormones in general. And what I notice, and I think a lot of women listening, is leading up to my period, so anxious, the inner critic so loud. And the minute the period comes, it's like a veil has lifted. So why is our mental health affected so much like that week leading up to our period, would you say?
I would say kind of 2 things. One is that we're not typically taught that in the luteal phase, which you're talking about, that PMS phase, and the first part of our period, our metabolism is ramped up about 25%. So we're burning additional like 250, 350 calories a day. So our energy supply is likely not meeting our energy demand. That's going to be one part of the issue, and that creates anxiety in the body. And 2, we want to look at progesterone there, because what happens after we ovulate is, estrogen specifically drops off a lot faster, and progesterone is really supposed to be there to kind of support and calm us, sort of through the end until it finally cacks out before we get our bleed. But if it's not there, that's when we start to feel more things like anxiety or have sleep issues or
irritability.
Mean girl thought, irritability for sure, and mean girl thoughts. This is something I've just started, it's like all of a sudden that mean girl voice gets really loud during that time. So some people they're cranky, other people it's like a lot of self issues. And that typically has to do with not enough progesterone, or at least a loss of function in the balance of estrogen and progesterone. So we can support that, I think, one, by recognizing that progesterone is really sensitive to cortisol. So then like right around the time that you ovulate, really starting to think about, okay, how can I scale back? How can I double down on like my stress management? How can I fill that joy cup up, and really just lean into my like healthy practices as best as I can. And also looking at estrogen levels, because if the estrogen and progesterone are symbiotic, so if there's too much estrogen, there's automatically not going to be enough progesterone. So can I, look at, eating more foods that help flush out and metabolize the estrogen a little bit better? Can we start there with those holistic pieces? And then if they don't work, that's when we can kind of take a deeper look at supplements, or maybe the liver's backed up and why is this happening? But sometimes just, really leaning into like pulling back on your workouts and calming down and finding joy in that PMS period. And working on flushing out your estrogen with like omega-3s and broccoli and cruciferous veggies can make all the difference.
Man, just that answer right there is a game changer.
Moral of the story, do less. One of my best friends, she posted an Instagram story the other day that was like, studies show by doing less, it's actually better for your health. So I'm doing less. And I'm like, thank you. Like, we need that reminder.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And the reality is like in your follicular and ovulatory phase, which is like the sort of the 2 to 2.5 weeks after your period, we are capable of accomplishing like 150%.
Mm-hmm.
So in the luteal phase, in the first part of our period, scaling back to 75 still gets us to the, to the 100, the average of the 100 we're going for. We just need to recognize that we're not small men. We operate in a very different way. And if you go with that flow, then I think we thrive. And I'm honestly, this is just a thought. I'm convinced that this is where I think women get this bad rap of being catty, because we just haven't been taught how our cycles work. So we don't have self-compassion and we don't have compassion for each other.
Yes. And the world isn't designed for us. It really should be like, well, she's off this week. It's leading up to her follicular phase, or
Andrea, not yet.
When you know what cycle you're in, I just think it's so empowering, because you can say, okay, my hormones are off. This is why I'm feeling this way. Like, to know why you're feeling a certain way and to not have any shame or guilt around, it's not because you're not doing enough. It's because your body is working all overtime and it needs a little more love. And that is productive. Like, by you slowing down and resting, it's pulling back that arrow so that come your follicular phase, you're going to be on top of the world.
That's a great example. That's exact. And, one of my favorite quotes, I can't remember who said it, but this didn't come from me. It's like, Mother Nature never rests, but everything gets done. The same thing happens in the 4 seasons, right? You guys live in a place with 4 seasons. It's like, without winter, we can't have spring, we can't have summer, we can't have fall, we can't, you know what I mean? Like, we have to have the seasons, and our body is the exact same as women.
Yeah. It's like, in order to feel good or to have that energy, okay, this part of my cycle, we got to slow down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that comes back to the internal and the self-talk, the mindset, and of how, when you are feeling so low, what is that thought you're thinking? Is it, oh my gosh, I suck? Or is it, no, I'm just getting my period, I'm about to bleed.
Yeah, women are superheroes for sure.
They're magic.
And so are you. Women are magic. Yes, we talked about this. I was on the Period Whisper podcast, and we were just talking about women and just even thinking about that. Like, this is how we feel leading up to our period. And then we're bleeding for like 7 days.
And then you're going to carry a child for 9 months.
What we do. And I'm just so happy that you're helping. We do have another question, but you're helping also people that, like, you've been there. Like, you're going through this in real time. You have found answers. You have the education and the heart to help women. I just think that you are such a unique gift, and I'm so happy that we have you. And I know, I have already had more questions since I got to know that you existed, and I've searched and scrolled through your 200 some episodes to be like, oh, sweet. She legit already answered this for me. And so I'm just so thankful and so happy that you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you. The same goes for you guys. I love what you do and what you bring and what you put out in this world.
Thank you.
All right, Bria, last question. If you could go back and tell younger Bria one thing, what age would you choose and what would you tell her?
I think I would go back to 18, and I would tell her to take time to know herself.
It's a pivotal age, yeah.
That's powerful.
What do you think she would have found out if she took time?
I mean, I think she would have figured out she was gay. Not 39 or whatever.
You realized you were gay at 39?
Yeah. Yeah. 39. Yeah. 38,
Wow.
39.
I did not. I don't know much about your story. I'm just scrolling through perimenopause right now.
I'm what they
Wow.
call a late to lifer.
Yes.
Hey, better late than never.
Yeah,
Better to listen to your body, listen to your true self now. Like for anyone listening, it's never too late.
And also the fact that your wife's name is Freedom.
I know.
Like do you feel like you manifested this or what?
It's like freedom who freed me. I don't know. It's the most crazy, like, yeah, it gives us all a good laugh.
So happy for you. Yeah. Oh, I hate to see you go. I feel like I have a lot more questions, so this is not the end. But we always leave our listeners with a piece of gold, a quote that speaks to you, whether it's from you or for someone else. Would you share yours, please?
Yeah, I think, my favorite quote that I hold on to every day is be more in your life and not just less on a scale.
This is Gold Ivy signing off.
Listen to your truth and go chase your gold.
Oh, what a great
That is
quote.
such a good quote. I've never heard that.